the Raptors go out and, well, first of all, no surprise who went first, but the Raptors went out and got Grady Dick, who described his jacket last night as wearing a pair of Dorothy's shoes from The Wizard of Oz. What do we make of that, Scott? That this guy's going to be the 3-point shooter that the Raptors finally needed.
John, I think like everybody, you saw the jacket and you were like, wow, this guy is not shy. He's a comfortable young man. And then when he said it was the Dorothy slipper thing, and of course he's from Kansas, I was like, all right, I get that. That's actually pretty cool. Like, good for him to throw a little hometown love in there. So that was fun. Look, I think the surprising thing for me with last night's draft was how the Raptors just in the end didn't really do anything other than stay with their pick the best guy available. As it turns out, he suits a need they have, which is shooting. But there's been so much talk, of course, in the lead up to this of would they make a move? Is a Pascal Siakam or an OG Anunoby on the market? Were they eyeing one of course, they were never going to get the number 1 overall pick, but were they eyeing 2 or 3 or something like that? In the end, they end up just adding a guy to the rotation who they hope will be a good player. And as I said, suits a position of need. But it sort of seems like a step toward the Raptors bringing back much of the same team that they had last year. And I'm not sure when it ended that's necessarily where we expected this would all go.
Yeah, well, I guess my question to both Richard and Bruce is, do you concur? Is this a case of more of the same is the right thing, Richard, for this basketball team?
Well, first, let me say it's good to be with Scott and Bruce, and I know how tight Bruce is with Masai, so I know Bruce was on the phone with him and Bobby right before the pick, concurring. Listen, they need shooting help, so in that sense, like the pick itself, I think is a good pick, and if you read all the experts who really study this stuff on a day-to-day basis, Grady Dick was probably the best shooter in the draft, or maybe second. He fell maybe a touch to them. So I think in that sense, maybe they got a little bit lucky. They weren't sure he would be on the board. I think for the value of when you're picking at 13, I think it's a pretty decent pick. I mean, none of us know. It's just like, making the decision, Scotty Barnes versus Jalen Suggs. We could have said anything we said, but ultimately it has to play out. It's more interesting to sort of like, to Scott's point, is like, what does it mean heading forward for Fred VanVleet, Jakob Poeltl? And I think unless something dramatically changes, I think the reality of the Raptors is that they're not really changing dramatically. I think they're hoping that last year was a bit of an aberration. New coach comes in and maybe changes up stuff, but like fundamentally, and I'll kick it over to Bruce, like the team is really fundamentally very much the same as last year. And I think, and quite frankly, Masai and Bobby Webster may not be wrong. Like, they may think if things sort of were just a little bit different, maybe they are a 47-win team as opposed to a 41-win team. And, and then you sort of roll the dice and hope you maybe get a little bit hot in the Eastern Conference. But they're in a very weird place right now because they're clearly not blowing it up. But at the same time, they're clearly not good enough to win an NBA title. It's a kind of a weird time for them. How do you see it, Bruce?
I think change is going to come. I don't think it happened last night. One thing that was interesting last night, you notice right before the draft, Chris Haynes, who's one of several insiders who cover the NBA, reported that Pascal Siakam is giving out signals to teams that he only wants to re-sign with the Raptors. Okay. And he did it right before the draft. That's interesting. After there had been rumors that the Raptors might be looking at trading Siakam, for example, for the number 3 pick to Portland. That's interesting. And Chris Haynes is really close to Dame Lillard. That's interesting too. I think, and I've said this for a long time, I think Pascal is the guy who's going to go because it's the thing that makes sense. This team doesn't make sense as it stands right now. Like, there are good players, and you can say that removing Nick Nurse and changing the coach is going to allow a lot of younger players to fill better roles. And maybe with positivity, Nick was really paranoid and kind of unhappy at the end. Maybe that's going to help a lot of things. But there's still there's fundamental problems with how the team is built. You got 3 guys, Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Scotty Barnes, for 2 positions essentially, and 2 of them can't shoot threes. And that's a problem. because Scotty Barnes is going to be the center of this team coming up, and he can't really shoot threes. Jakob Poeltl is almost certainly going to be re-signed by these guys. He can't shoot. So you can't really, like, Pascal is what they want Scotty to become, except they think Scotty can be better because he's bigger, stronger, has a better natural sense of the game in terms of seeing the floor a little bit. So I think Pascal is going to be the guy to go. And then it just didn't happen last night. So Grady Dick is a nice piece because you've got a real shooter. Like, I don't think this guy's Klay Thompson. Our friend Michael Grange kind of said, there's a little bit of Klay in him. I went back actually last night and compared Grady Dick's first year and Klay Thompson's first year, and they're actually pretty comparable. But Klay, I think, is a more natural shooter, obviously, and is a better athlete, a little longer, not as big. This kid is going to be a great shooter in the NBA, and they need that. What do you move Pascal for is the question that they're kind of asking themselves, I think, right now.
So let me sorry, Bruce, let me just follow up with you. So, like, I think it seemed to me, and again, it's not like I've interviewed anybody, so this is just all sort of reading the tea leaves from the reports out there. It seems where the disconnect is from how the Raptors value Pascal Siakam to what other teams may ultimately give up for him, right? Because I as much as I love Siakam, I agree with you philosophically that something has to change, but you also can't give this guy away for not enough assets coming back. So is there, you think, I don't know, can they get fair value for him, I guess is what I would ask.
It's a really good question. It depends what you want to do. Like, I've kind of written this a little bit before, is the Raptors have to decide what they want to be. Do they want to try to trade Siakam for a comparable star who fits better right now? Or do they want to go young and change the whole timeline of this team to be more of a Scotty Barnes timeline, right? A 21-year-old timeline. OG's 24, Yak's 20, what is he, 26, 27. You can fit in there. But all of a sudden, Siakam and Fred VanVleet don't fit quite as well, right? Or do you trade him for one of the guys? There's a number of names that are floating around the league right now as to guys you might be able to go get. So like Zach LaVine in Chicago, right? DeJounte Murray in Atlanta. Karl Anthony Towns in Minnesota. I wouldn't go near that contract with a 100-foot pole even before he started talking about how he changed the game. Good God. Come on, man. There's guys like that, like Anthony Simons, you could probably go get out of Portland. But what you're looking at is flawed, good players, and how you have to decide whether they would fit what you were going to do, right? Or do you go for younger and a package of younger kind of players and picks? But then you got to figure out which teams are in a position to move those, but aren't rebuilding now, right? Like if Houston doesn't sign James Harden, they don't need Pascal Siakam particularly. So it's a really interesting question. I don't know what they're going to do. I think Siakam is just the logical choice for who you move. And once you move him, let's say they did it for Zach LaVine, take a name at almost random, and you re-sign Fred and you re-sign Yak. It's an expensive team, but you go Fred and Zach LaVine, OG and Scotty Barnes and Jakob Poeltl. That at least makes sense conceptually, right? You got three shooters, you got some finishers, you got some athleticism, you have some length. Your backcourt is both small and not a great defender as the other guy. But I mean, it makes a little more sense. But the Raptors are going to change.
The one question I have is, do you think there was any belief internally, guys? Richard, to you first, that just changing the coach was enough? Is there any thought to that process?
Well, I tend to agree with Bruce. And I think, I think Bruce and Scott are certainly closer to the Raptors than I am. But you can't stay in the middle or the lower middle or the upper middle, which is where they are now. It's ultimately just it's a disastrous path. There's no path to a championship, and there's no path to bottoming out where, you hopefully roll the lottery dice and you get like a guy like San Antonio got yesterday. I do think if you watch them, I think there were guys who tuned out Nick. I just think, this happens with Pat. It happened with Pat Riley. It happens, generally speaking, with Phil Jackson. It happens with all great coaches. At a certain point, the message just doesn't work anymore. And I think with Nick, by the end, it didn't work. He also, to me, and I don't blame him, Nick Nurse is paid to coach, is paid to win games. And he ran a lot of his best players really into the ground in minutes, but I didn't think he had a choice. He didn't trust half his roster. So I think, John, I think the culture will be much better with a new coach, but I agree with Bruce. It doesn't fix the fundamental structural issues with the team.